In 1986, my family vanished at a carnival. Just disappeared while I looked away for only a second. I spent years searching for answers until I finally tried to let it go. But then years later, I got a letter. A letter that pulled me back to where it all began. Back into the heart of a nightmare. Asterisk monoliths pregnant with water and fury flickered upon the distant horizon. They drifted slowly, inevitably, covering the earth in shadow. The fear on the flight was palpable, made worse by the sounds of babies crying and first-time flyers yelping every time. The plane shook. It was nearly enough to distract me from a distant point by the foothills where what remained of Mr. Fulcrum's funhouse gathered dust within the mountain shade. Nearly. The airplane rocked violently again, sending up a fresh wave of screams. The stewardess and her team valiantly tried to calm the passengers down, but I could tell by the rising pitch in their voices that they were worried too. The storm was set to be epic in proportion, one of the most powerful ones in recent decades. My eyes drifted as I tried to blink away outlines of light that shimmered around others. But it looked like my perception was permanently fucked. When I focused, it helped reduce the brightness of their aura, but then I could perceive beyond the surface to a person's very core. In that deep place was a nexus of energy, an interplay of the purest white light and shadow. Some had greater concentrations of one over the other, yet there was not a single person, no matter how good, who didn't have a bit of shadow. There was also not a single person, no matter how bad, who didn't have a star burning in the center. Of all that hurt, you might be wondering whether I was able to see my own deep nature, and the answer is no. Even if I could, I would not want to. You probably think that I am a good man because I have a noble cause, but the reality is I have done a whole lot of bad in my life. And there are times where I feel like the world would be better off if I wasn't in it. The only thing I've ever been good at is killing, destroying. That's weak shit. It's harder to be patient and build something. It made me wonder how these folks would react if somehow, some way, this plane slipped into the void. Would they deal with it better than I had? Was there something about the nature of the void that reflected the worst in us? The finger twitched in my pocket. I growled and gave it a nice swat. It had been doing that ever since I left Chicago. I sighed, more than a little irritated, and turned back to the window, pressed up against. It was the sagging face of a frog-like being with saucer-sized eyes that glowed like lanterns. My fists clenched as I returned to my mantra where I chanted my parents' names over and over in tandem with my breathing. The void had left its mark. These spirits were following me now, and in this world they weren't incorporeal beings incapable of hurting me. But that was fine. I could hurt them too. I made a finger gun and fired it between Frogman's eyes. It grinned, licked the window with a barbed tongue, and jumped away, its bulbous body vanishing into the clouds. After the plane touched down, I went on the hunt for some coffee. I decided to stick with the crowd this time, and among that chaotic mess of arguing families, annoyed businessmen, and travelers, I was able to stop shaking. I eventually found a nicely crowded cafe with a view onto the airport tarmac. I ordered a large black coffee along with a crispy breakfast sandwich stuffed with hash browns, eggs, bacon, and cheese. I asked for an extra side of jalapagos and then took a seat near the window. The rain was coming down heavy outside. Low visibility, but good for the work I intended to do. I lost myself in the simple conversations taking place around me and finally enjoyed a hot meal. Was about halfway through my sandwich when I realized something was wrong. I patted my pocket, then my jacket. Shit, I muttered, frantically looking around. The finger was gone. Had I dropped it? Or did someone steal it? I was searching by the cafe's register when I heard someone yell, "Snake! A snake!" The cry hung in the air for a moment before the mass of people instantly became a mess of shoving, pointed fingers, and cursing. Then, as people tended to do in an emergency, they started knocking each other over and running every which way, terrified that they would smash what I could only assume was the finger. I sprinted shoulder first and pushed my way through the commotion, sending people flying left and right. "Move," I roared. I spied the finger slithering away as fast as it could towards the bathrooms. I dove for it, but the damn thing wiggled underneath the bathroom door. "You little shit," I roared. I kicked the door open and stepped right into a puddle of water. The entire bathroom was flooded. Through flickering lights, I saw the finger, floating by the stalls. It had gone rigid. I pressed forward through water levels nearly knee-height. I couldn't see or hear a source of the flooding. The sinks were off, and I didn't think a toilet could be responsible for all the water. Grimace before leaning over to scoop it up. "More trouble than you're worth," I said after giving it a few shakes and zipping it up tight in my pocket. I was stumbling back towards the exit when a great mass moved impossibly beneath my feet, as if rising from the ocean depths. It glided smoothly through the water, circling around me first before swimming around the corner. The lights overhead flickered faster until I was only seeing snapshots of the bathroom. I listened and heard something breach the surface, followed by wet plopping sounds. Ribbit RBBA ends wrapped around the corner as a body meant for crushing pressure came into view. Its veined pot belly sagged to its knees, yet the legs and shoulders were heavy with muscle. Big red eyes, pointing in different directions, suddenly focused on me. "What do you have there?" he croaked. A long barbed tongue slid out of his rubbery mouth and tasted the water. His eyes gleamed. Such power contained within that salt flesh. I raised my jaw and rolled my shoulders. "You ain't got the right kind of heart for this fight, frogman." He took a step forward, the sheer power of his webbed foot hitting. The tile caused the walls to crack. He blew green mucus from his orifices and laughed. "I taste your fear, ape. I was afraid." He had trapped me in a kill box, and I would not be able to take him down with just my hands and feet. I searched for something, anything that I could use to kill him with, and all the while the water continued to rise. More demons were coming with it. "What is it y'all want? The finger?" "Keep the finger. I care not for it. But you burned so bright that I could see you from the chasm. Once I consume you, I will have your spirit forever." That can be a powerful tool, especially when one is already claimed by a god. He chortled. He suddenly leaped towards me, his thick arms outstretched and pink tongue shooting out. I dove beneath the waves and kicked towards the exit. I was never the fastest swimmer, but I think the frog was counting on my fear of the water and overshot because of it. Thousands of eyes that glowed like coals watched from the depths, and they were rapidly getting closer. I scrambled onto the ledge and narrowly avoided a pink blur that punched a hole into the wall. I threw the door open and ran, the army of frogs' wet laughter following me out of the airport. I got into my work truck and sped out of the lot. I didn't let my foot even slightly off the pedal until I was well onto the freeway. The world was changing and I couldn't keep up with it. Serpentine creatures with wings soared through the clouds. Many-limbed felines hopped from roof to roof, and orbs of light shot across the skies that my mind was slipping away from me again, and I knew I didn't have much longer left before I was incapable of seeing things through. I would become a living corpse, frozen by wave after wave of increasing spiritual sight. I didn't care what they did with my body after my mind was gone. All I needed was to see Mr. Fulcrum dead, and I would be ready to die. When I was closer to home, I passed a gas station near a crossroads where my dad used to bring me to get snacks before we went on hikes. A giant stood there now. It was over 15 feet in height and covered in blood. Empty eye sockets followed me as I drove past, gripped my steering wheel so tight it nearly broke. There wasn't a gun I owned big enough to put that fucker down. Finally, I yelled. I couldn't tell you what emotions were in that cry. All I can say is there is only so much a human can take, and even the strongest soldiers can break from the weakest of blows if they have already weathered too many. The rain still hadn't let up when I pulled into the driveway. I stopped on the porch in order to take it all in, knowing in my soul this was the last time I would. I regretted distancing myself so much from the place. Outside of some dust, everything was in good condition. Like I mentioned, I hardly spent much time here, preferring to stay in wayside motels whenever I was in town. There were just too many ghosts out in the living room. I saw myself as a kid playing with toys while my parents smiled. I could see the pure joy on my little face, along with the shadow of a worry that they might end up not loving me after all, and return me to the orphanage dot in the kitchen. My mom made heart-shaped blueberry pancakes. She kissed me on the top of my head and told me how much she loved me and that nothing would ever change that dot. In the back, my dad taught me how to ride a dirt bike. I remember falling nearly every time I got on for the first few weeks. My dad would always tell me to get back up and try again. Said that's how to deal with any problem in life. Always get back up. Always try again. My vision blurred as I trudged through the empty home, my footsteps echoing like the memories of their love. I slammed open the door that led into the garage and passed by my dad's tarp-covered Sportster. It had been some time since I last took her out for a spin. I gave my gear a good look over, making sure everything was functioning well. The familiar smells of oil and iron grounded me. Once I was satisfied, I strapped on my combat vest and double-checked that the witch's finger was still inside my pocket. It was. I hated that feeling of relief I felt. I set the visitor's gift down on my workbench and inspected it beneath the lamplight. It was about a foot long and heavy. There were no inscriptions on it or buttons of any kind. The surface was smooth and gave off a slight vibration. On a whim, I held it up to my ear because I was going to give it a shake. Then I heard the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Slow, calm, and powerful. The energy of the baton, if that was the right word, was the opposite of the witch's finger. It just frustrated me that I didn't know what to do with it. I was packing extra rounds when I heard a low moan resound throughout the landscape. A wave of barks rose to meet the giant's cry, and I saw flocks of birds fly away, preferring to brave the storm than to remain. I wiped the grime away from the garage window to better peer through. About a mile out was a solid row of those eyeless giants. They were headed towards the neighborhood, and ahead of them appeared to be more of the frogmen, along with a host of other creatures I could not identify. I considered simply destroying the finger in that moment, but something told me that all of this would only end once Mr. Fulcrum was dead. I had made my choices, and it was time to face the consequences. I didn't fear that. I welcomed it. A wild grin lit up my face as I revved the Sportster. She purred for me, ready for one last ride into a thunderous hell. The earth was drowning, her face hidden from the burning skies. A winding road marked my final destination into an encounter with a being who had served as the focal point of my life ever since he robbed me of the only people who ever loved me. Death followed close behind, but I was faster, a blur of lightning, and rage, single-minded in my pursuit of one thing and one thing only. The sight of Fulcrum's face behind the barrel of my gun and the feeling of the trigger against my finger howled in defiance against nature's fury and her blinding light. Fulcrum. Part 2. Ever since my meeting with Madame Levitt, I have been lying low trying to process what I learned within her chambers. I think I am finally stable enough to write it down. Before I begin, I want to warn you that knowledge comes at a price. If I were you, I'd turn away and forget about Mr. Fulcrum and Madame Levitt. I wouldn't look any deeper into what the nature of the visitor has to say about our reality. I would pretend that this is just some stupid story and not the Last words of a marked man. You have that option still. Do not treat that lightly, Dot. It is too late for me, however. My fate was sealed the moment I became an orphan again, but I promise that I will not go down without a fight. I will burn it all to the ground and take this son of a bitch with me. I won't allow another person to endure what I have been through. Like I said, friends, leave while you can. I will go on alone. First, however, your explanation. About an hour after my first entry, I left the hotel and got onto a bus that would take me into West Side Chicago. While I sat there, I looked out onto the passing city, my mind drifting further and further back in time to the day I graduated from boot camp. It was burning hot out on the concrete, but the excitement we all felt seemed to shield us from that. We were part of something bigger than ourselves now, a history that was constantly unfolding, a flame carried for hundreds of years forward. It was what I always wanted. Despite that, I remember also feeling a growing sense of dread as I looked out onto the stands and saw all the families eagerly waiting for the moment they could leave and hug their Marine. There was so much pride in the way the fathers carried themselves that day, and so much love in the way the mothers looked at their babies who had become warriors against reality. I wanted so badly to see my parents rush towards me and wrap me in their embrace, but that moment did not come. I watched with an impassive expression as all those families reconnected. There were some people who came up to me and shook my hand or congratulated me, but they didn't linger for long. I was feared. Younger me enjoyed that, felt some power because of it. I realized now that all I was doing was isolating myself further. Had been known as Tyson during boot camp because of some surface level similarities between myself and the boxer, along with the mutual savagery we both employed during hand-to-hand combat. Whether it was with gloves, batons, or pure grappling, I hardly ever lost, and when I did, it was mostly because I let my rage get the best of me. The instructors picked up on that, and oh boy did they punish me for it. I can't count how many burpees I did because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. One of them, an instructor we called Kong, behind his back of course, approached me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea before Moses, awe plain on their faces. He was 6'6" and had the build of a professional wrestler, along with an air of intensity which made you feel like an ant when standing before him. It was hard to not take a few steps back, but I held my ground. I was a Marine now. He stopped in front of me and nodded. I started to raise my hand in order to salute him, but he waved his dismissively. Why are you out here mean mugging and feeling sorry? For yourself? Just the way my face looks, I said. He stared at me blankly, and I couldn't resist smiling after a long moment of silence. Sir, he smirked and held out a hand big enough to crush a lesser man's skull. I shook it and nearly yelped from the power in his grip. You're young and hot-blooded, so I don't expect you to listen. But I'ma tell you anyway. Whatever it is you're holding on to, let that shit go. It'll kill you, one way or another. Maybe I should have listened to him. I'd probably have a wife and some kids and be living somewhere nice while being plump. And retired. The only real danger, prostate cancer or some shit. The ironic part is I don't think I would be alive now if I had listened. It was hate more than anything else, which got me out of fights years later within that graveyard of empires. When others failed to rise from those desert sands, I kept going. Not because of love or hope or any of that other bullshit. Just the desire to never be a victim again. The bus came to a stop. After nodding at the driver, I stepped outside and pulled my hood up against the cool air. With a creak and a groan, the bus rolled away, leaving me alone on the sidewalk. I took stock of my surroundings, looking not just with my eyes, but also by relying on an intuitive sense for danger, honed over years spent in hostile environments. Funnily enough, the neighborhood I was in wasn't entirely unlike the ones I wandered through after escaping from foster care. That's how I quickly knew something was deeply wrong about this side of town. There were no cats skulking around, or packs of dogs eagerly running up to check out who the newcomer was. In fact, there were no animals at all. Not even birds. As I walked towards Madame Levitt's apartment complex, I peered down various side roads and alleyways and didn't see any homeless folk either. The streets were lifeless, and it wasn't even past 8. The first sign I got that. I wasn't completely alone, however, was a light suddenly being shut off from inside one of the apartments after I walked past it. After that, I started to notice. If I suddenly looked up at one of the red brick tenements, I could catch blinds suddenly closing, or, in a couple of cases, the glimpse of frightened faces peeking from a rooftop. It only made me too aware that I was hardly armed. All I carried was some pepper spray and a knife. I picked up the pace. Madame Levitt's apartment complex was practically abandoned. I saw an empty parking lot, and as I walked upstairs, noticed every door was left ajar. From one of the upper landings. I paused to look down at the pool due to some movement I had seen out of the corner of my eye. There was an inflatable lounge chair floating in it. It was stained with blood. I reached the top floor of the building and found myself looking down the length of a yellow hallway with a single flickering light hanging from the ceiling. Faintly, I could hear someone singing, though I couldn't place from where. I steeled myself and pressed forward, reminding myself I had been through worse than this. I knocked on the door to room 1 and waited. In no time at all, Madame Levitt swung the door wide open. It took every minute of training I ever endured to maintain my composure. She hadn't aged a single day. Her hair was braided and decorated with dozens of silver rings in the shapes of snakes, insects, and moons. She wore a shimmering gown with a plunging neckline that revealed ample cleavage. Hanging between her breasts was a spiral pendant that I could have sworn was spinning. I was at a loss for words. With a knowing grin, she beckoned me inside. I was so distracted by her beauty that I barely noticed her nails were made of metal. Her home was lavishly decorated, standing in sharp contrast to the urban brutalism of outside. I saw statues of Hecate, Isis, and Freya, each occupying positions of honor in different rooms. I walked over thick, richly patterned rugs and avoided furniture that looked uncomfortable to sit on. Plants tumbled out and down from their pots, all over the apartment, filling the air with scents of spices and earth. We walked through a beaded curtain into a room she called the egg. It was aptly named. The floor was sunken and the walls curved upwards into what I assumed was a rounded ceiling, but I couldn't see it because of the deep shadow which covered the upper reaches of the room. She motioned towards a small wooden table in the center, which had a large crystal globe atop it. There were lit candles, a teapot with a stylized face on it, and all manner of other props within the room. More than I can possibly describe here, all contributed towards the image of her being some kind of witch. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. When I was still a skeptic, you see, up to this point, I thought I was dealing with some kind of human trafficking ring headed by Fulcrum and Levitt. I didn't believe in the supernatural. I had been trained to see reality in simple terms. As a soldier, you focus on what is useful towards the present moment. Too much thinking about alternative possibilities leads to paralysis. So my worldview was that whatever existed, or rather whatever actually mattered, was what I could perceive with ordinary senses. All of that came undone when a massive white hand with fingers as long as my arm reached down towards the table from the shadows above and poured tea into both of our cups. Madame Levitt smiled at the look of horror on my face and sipped. "Are you not a fan of kava?" "I have chamomile if you'd prefer," she said. I sprung away from the table and put my back to the wall. The pale arm slowly retreated into the shadows. "The fuck is that?" I said. Madame Levitt tilted her head, and in a soothing voice said, "He is a visitor." A friend. Do not worry, he helps protect this place. I took a deep breath, eyes still on the shadows above. Protects it? Protects it from what? Please have a seat, Marcel. All is well. I stood there for a while, and she continued to smile. I glanced at the door, debating running away and drowning out this memory with a bottle of whiskey. Then, I thought of my parents and found my courage again. I returned to the table. What was that? I asked again. I had to grip my hand under the table to keep it from trembling. Is that a question, dear? I froze, recalling the rules my liaison had mentioned to me. Never ask more than 3 questions. That's all the money and time covers. If you ask another, even on accident, you would be required to pay. He told me that cash wouldn't do if it came to that double quotes. No, I apologize, I said. Very well, let us begin, she said. Her head suddenly snapped back, eyes rolling until only the whites showed, and her jaw unhinged wider than any human's was capable of. Living song tumbled out of her mouth, becoming light and shadow in the room around us. I was frozen in place as men and women from times past, present and future, danced and spun around our table, the room falling away until we were suspended within a void, and they were the only lights surrounding us. Within that deep cold, I could sense unseen things floating past us, bigger than skyscrapers, their minds brushing up against my own, threatening to send me spiraling forevermore into insanity. But I held on like a pit bull to my sense of self, chanting my parents' names within my mind as an anchor until the things drifted past towards distant points of light. 3 questions, child. I couldn't resist. I had questions pre-planned and thought out over the course of weeks. But within that infinity that wrapped the sensory world in its embrace, I yearned for knowledge of this place. Where are we? A space between the end and the beginning. A bridge your ancestors once traveled before they forgot how ... She grew silent, though her expression remained ecstatic. I shook my head. That's no answer. Then be more specific. I gritted my teeth. I couldn't hold on much longer. The more my mind tried to comprehend this place, the quicker I felt it slipping through my fingers. And somewhere, whether it was below or above or everywhere at once, I felt something starting to wake. Where is Mr. Fulcrum? I whispered. There was a brief pause. Then Madame Levitt and the watching spirits screamed, their piercing wails reverberating across the void. Presences shifted within that terrible vastness and approached us rapidly while the glowing crystal orb shifted to the image of a pale white. I filled with an ancient malice. I met its gaze directly with my own and hissed, I see you too. The presences circled us like sharks, ready to feast upon our fear. Then the great hand of the visitor swatted them away and wrapped us within its embrace. When it let go, we were back in the egg. Madame Levitt was face down on the table, barely breathing. Tea had spilled everywhere, and the crystal globe had shattered into 3 thick chunks. Vapor rose from the remains and dissipated into the lingering shadow above. I got up from my seat and noticed the walls were shaking like a train was going past, but the vibrations gradually settled until all was calm. Once more, you fool, Madame Levitt finally said. She looked up at me, her face suddenly lined and sagging. All of her beauty was gone. You owe me an answer. She wheezed and coughed up a foul-smelling dark liquid onto the table. It sizzled. I do, but I'd rather risk the consequences of breaking my oaths than to deal with his wrath. Please, child, ask anything else. I slammed my knife into the table. Tell me where he is. Madame Levitt moaned and leaned back in her seat. I can tell you where riches can be found, or the secrets of immortality, or... I pulled the knife free and started towards her. She threw up her hands and squealed, The tunnels. Damn you, he's in the tunnels. But be wary, he isn't alone. You go to your demise should you try to find him. I squatted down and pointed my blade at her. How do I kill him? She cackled then, her eyes wide and mouth dripping with that black goo. Kill him? Oh, you poor man. You have no idea what forces you're meddling with. Flee now and buy yourself a brief respite before his servants come for you. Answer the question. Madame Levitt tried to slash at me with her claws, but I was ready. My blade flicked out and cut a finger clean off. I didn't know why, but I felt a powerful urge to take it, so I stashed the finger into my pocket. While she howled on the floor dot, I stopped in the doorway and said over my shoulder, once I am done with him, I will be back for you. I moved to leave, but didn't make it far before being yanked back by the visitor. I thought it was the end for me there as it pulled me towards the ceiling, but then its other hand lowered. I could see something held there between its index finger and thumb, a golden baton like the kind they use in track. Thanks, I said to the shadows. The visitor set me down gently and with a nudge pushed me out of the egg. I made it out of the complex unscathed, though Madame Levitt's screams followed me for blocks. I had no idea how I was going to kill Mr. Fulcrum, but at least I knew where he was. It appeared the agents had missed their target in those tunnels. I won't.